when we got nominated for 5 Eisners the following year, I was just blown away. Like I was just, I remember going to the awards ceremony, and like when they announced the best artist, I was clapping as if for somebody else because I didn't hear my name. I was just like, "Oh, that's good, whoever won." And then my editor was like, he's like, "Dude, that was you." I'm like, "Oh shit!" Like I was just like so out of it.
Welcome back to the Comics Cube. Today I am with Ramón Pérez, and happy birthday.
Oh, thank you very much. reaching the cusp of 50 years.
I was gonna say, do you think you are the second most famous Pérez in comics history?
I mean, often, compared to George, who recently passed, because when I started in comics, he was obviously, one of the biggest names in the industry. He still was, obviously, but I'd always get asked, "Is he your uncle or related?" I'm like, my answer would be like, Perez is like the Smith of Spain. Like everybody is a Perez in Spain, so it's a very common name. North America, I was a unique name, but I go over there on wallpaper.
Yeah, over here too.
So, okay.
The Philippines was a Spanish colony, so
yes,
we got a lot of you guys over here. You know what's insane though? Today is his birthday.
Oh, is it? Oh, wow.
His birthday, and I didn't.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, happy birthday to him up there in the sky.
Why? What is it that you love about comics?
Oh man, I think for me, I think it was just the joy of creating stories and sharing with them. The autonomy that you have complete control of the narrative, the visuals, your writing, your everything. And because I remember even as far back as when I was a little kid, I used to draw like comic strips, kind of showcasing my friends or whatever it might be. And I think it was just a way to entertain and connect with people. And I think that's still true to this day. I love, sharing stories, adventures, escapism, and having the ability to do everything from writing it to drawing it to producing it. So yeah, it's one of the few mediums I think where you can create everything from the ground up. Aside from obviously, someone writing a novel or prose, but I guess in a visual medium, I guess. But yeah, I think that's the joy of it. I can do so much with so little, and my budgets are infinite, really.
That is actually well exemplified by the printout you have on your wall over there.
Oh, which one?
Of Flash Gordon.
Oh, the Flash Gordon one. Yeah. Exactly.
Talk about doing a lot with a limited budget.
Well, exactly, right? Like you could go anywhere, any place in the world or the universe, galaxy, whatever it might be. And as long as your imagination can take you there, it's possible. You know what I mean? And you don't need a team of 100 CG artists to do it. You just have you by yourself, and you're creating that journey.
And the only thing that you would have to invest in is time.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It is labor intensive, but it's a joy to do. Like I kind of always joke, I kind of zen out when I'm drawing. It's just like I kind of enter the world I'm in and kind of just enjoy the journey while I'm there.
What's the hardest thing about making a comic? Is it the actual drawing, or is it the layouts, figuring out how it's going to flow?
I think it's what you just actually mentioned. It's time, because it is labor intensive. Like I love the layout stage, the building of the story. All those things are favorite elements of mine, and come quite naturally. I don't have any difficulty with the process, but I think my biggest hurdle or my biggest enemy is time. Like I want to do so much, but you're only one human being who's doing this manually. You're not pressing a button, having something render while you go have a coffee or whatever it might be. You're doing the rendering. You're the computer, whatever you want to call it, right? So that I think is the hardest thing for me to get over, because I'm always trying to do much more than I'm probably physically capable of in a day-to-day schedule.
What tools do you use?
These days I'm predominantly digital, to my regret, because I do miss working on paper. and my eyesight probably regrets it a little bit as well. But I use Clip Studio and Photoshop as my two main tools on a Cintiq. And but from time to time, I do delve back into working traditionally, and I do have a couple of projects lined up where I hope to return to the more traditional ink on paper page, because there's a tactile and also like an organic quality that can't happen digitally. You can't like accidentally do something digitally and make it work. You know what I mean? There's that freedom to traditional where you're just going in there with a toothbrush or your thumbprints or whatever it might be, and you're creating textures and you're just going where the medium takes you. I find digital being so controlled and so refined, it's pretty hard to get that same vibe with your work, you know. But I mean, I'm not begrudging it. Like, it's amazing. It's a tool I use, I love. But it'd be nice to actually step away and do something a bit more old school, if you will.
I'm going to backtrack a bit and
Yeah.
look back several years and ask you, what is there a particular comic or artist or writer or anything that made you realize you wanted to make comics?
It's funny that you say that, because I never realized I wanted to make comics. I enjoyed comics growing up, and I used to, like I said, create my own. I used to, you know, do I predominantly grew up on Sunday Funnies, so the newspaper strips. So a lot of humor strips like Garfield, Calvin and Hobbes, Mother Goose and Grimm, all these different newspaper strips. So I would always do these funny comic strips and stuff, and I would create these things all the way through high school. And when it came to choosing a career in the arts, it never occurred to me to make comics a career. I don't think I knew it was a thing. Like, no matter how many people I saw drawing comics, it never occurred to me that was a job someone had and they were getting paid to do it. Like, it was just, there was a disconnect there or something. And so I went to school for illustration, and you know, entered into, like, you know, learning to do editorial, advertising, graphic design, that sort of work. And it wasn't until I went there that I met a few my peers who were a little bit older than me at the time. One had gone to the Kubert School in New York, and another fellow came in second year, and he was avidly trying to get into comics. And I was like, oh, you can do this as a job. I didn't really consider it. And so I wasn't actively pursuing that till much later until my young adult years, basically. And before I turned comics, I worked in magazine work, editorial illustration for RPGs, video games, kids books. So I've done the whole map on the way to comics. But some of my early loves were like Al Williamson, the print you mentioned, Arthur Adams, Mike Mignola, Kevin Nolan. Trying to think who else. But even guys like Jim Davis and Bill Watterson, these were all like idols I had at the time. And I guess through their inspiration, I guess you could say they were the ones that leveraged me into what you could do or wanting to do in comics. But for me, it was just more so, I was like, oh, I can actually do this. And this is something I did as my hobby. I can focus on it becoming a career. So that was kind of like more the guiding principle than, oh, I want to be this guy, I want to be Jim Lee, or I want to be Arthur Adams. So that never really occurred to me. Okay. It was just more like, here's a place I can do what I've always done and get paid for it. This is amazing. You know?
It's the late 80s or early 90s. Cool. You get the Sunday strips. What's the first one you read?
Back before Calvin and Hobbes, it would have been Garfield. I was a huge Garfield fan growing up. I had all the little collections. Odie, I had one of those. I don't know if people would remember that. There's a Garfield telephone where you could pick up his back and stuff like that. So I had the Garfield telephone. I had like an Odie stuffed animal. So yeah, and then Mother Goose and Grimm. I found like Spider-Man was boring. Kathy was boring. There's a few other ones that I didn't quite like. But those are probably my favorites. And
Spider-Man was boring. That is interesting to hear from you.
Well, the newspaper strip, I just didn't find it. It was like, because nothing would happen. It would be like the first panel would be them recapping the previous, whatever happened the previous day. Then it would be something about to happen, and then it would be a cliffhanger. So you're like, Whereas with Calvin and Hobbes or Garfield, you got a beginning, end, and punchline, right?
Yeah.
So for a kid, I was just like, nothing happened here. What is this? It's like boring. But at least with Garfield or one of the other ones, I got a laugh, I got some engagement, whatever it might be, right? And if you look at my cartoonier style, which is where I first started doing work, you can really see my influences with things like Jim Davis and Bill Watterson.
You ever see the Garfield book, Babes and Bullets by Jim
Babes
Davis?
and Bullets? No, I don't think I've seen
where
that one.
it's the one where Garfield is a detective, and Jim Davis totally draws in like crime noir style.
Oh, really?
Amazing.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
I actually have it here.
Oh yeah, that's amazing.
If I have it, I could. I was just so excited to show it, but I guess I don't know where it is. But
I still have to this day on my. I'm not sure. Are we actually videoing this, or is it just audio?
It's video.
Okay, so I still have this is from my childhood, hanging on my wall, and I still have this little mini poster. I probably had this 45 years now, and
That
it still
is
goes
awesome.
with me. Yeah.
Yeah, people make fun of Garfield now, but I think they forget that there was a time when it was like really good, a really good comic.
Oh yeah, Garfield was the shit. Like, you know what I mean? And people make fun of Jim Davis, but I was recently watching a documentary called Stripped that was done by I believe it was David, one of my fellow webcomicer, and they interview Jim, and I watched the extended interview. And the guy's a business genius. Like he's created something that has been living now for almost 50 years. Like he's got a Garfield empire, and to keep that cat still relevant today after so long, after newspapers have, for the most part, almost died out, that cat is still relevant and has an audience and is a pop culture icon, right? So it's pretty amazing what he pulled off.
How did you break into the business of comics?
It was a slow, incremental chipping away. Like if I was breaking out of prison, it's like it would be like what was that movie?
Digging out with a spoon.
Yeah, essentially it. Like I'm just like Alcatraz, just trying to get like basically as I mentioned earlier, I had worked in RPGs, role-playing games. So I worked for Dungeons and Dragons, Rifts, Palladium, many other games like that. And I had always been trying to get into comics, and I would kind of often, get brick walls thrown up in front of me, whether it was because I'd come in with a science fiction portfolio of a graphic novel I'd maybe been working on, and they'd be like, Marvel would be like, well, we don't do science fiction, we do superheroes. And I'd be like, well, I can draw. That's the important part. A superhero is just a naked dude with a costume. Like science fiction is actually a little bit more involved. You got like vehicles, spaceships, all kinds of stuff. But so yeah, for me, it was a slow kind of incremental entry into the industry. I began to do conventions. I can't remember how early on I did them, but I began to do conventions where I would meet other creators. And oftentimes it was the relationships that I'd built with writers that got me work in comics. So like early on, I met Catherine Immonen, I met B. Clay Moore, and Scotty Young was a fan of my first webcomic, Butternut Squash. So we met early on in like, I think 99 or something like that, or maybe 2000. No, it would have been 2004 or 5. And so a lot of these writers would get me, they would get a job with Marvel or DC, and they would be like, hey, we want Ramón Pérez to draw this comic. And then Marvel or DC would be like, who the fuck is that? And I get a call. They're saying, yeah, Catherine Immonen wants you to draw this comic issue. Would you be interested in drawing Captain America? And I'd be like, yeah, that's cool. And it would be funny because I would like, they would be begrudgingly getting me the job, like, through the connection. But then I would hand in the work and they'd be like, oh, you can draw, you can storytell. And I'm like, yeah, these people aren't recommending me because I'm an idiot. It's, so it was a lot of that. And, but unfortunately it was just like a couple of one shots here, maybe a 3-issue run on another comic. I did inking. I inked other artists for a while because I was I'm quite fast. So a lot of editors also began to call me up to do really fast fill-in issues or catch up, where I had to like come in and relieve the main artist because he couldn't get the job done in time. So that was a little bit of my early years. And it wasn't till someone recommended me for Tale of Sand, where once I had the opportunity to do that book after auditioning for the book and getting approved, you know, I had the opportunity to do something where I was like free reign basically to do whatever I wanted. And because the book was, you know, so notably received, then I started getting all the calls from the people I was trying to get work from. So like suddenly Marvel was like, hey, do you want to work on X-Men? And I was like, I've been trying to work on X-Men for years, but you never return my calls. But you know what I mean? It's like, then you're the overnight sensation.
That's annoying.
Yeah. You know what I mean? But that's the case for a lot of people. It's like you're the overnight sensation, but really you've been building for 10 or 15 years to get to that overnight sensation point, right?
Absolutely.
So, and then that kind of exploded my entry point into comics, where I was doing covers and working on a lot of predominantly Marvel books, but other ones in there as well.
My next question is literally what put you on the map? Would you say was Tale of Sand? And
Yes.
I guess you've answered that. Tale of Sand, of course, is an amazing piece of work because it's a mostly silent book and it's a dream sequence and it's based on an unmade film by Jim Henson. What was even the creative process behind that? Like,
well, it's interesting because so I was approached by Archaea, who's now owned by Boom, to audition for the book, and I can't remember who it was that recommended me. It was someone who I had known, who I think had another book with Boom, and it was funny because I chatted with them, and they were like, I was like, well, what do you see here? Because at the time I was working in a few different styles. I had my mainstream comic book style, which I used for things like Wildcat or Captain America, but I was also doing children's books, and I was also doing some painted work for theater posters, and as well as a web comic at the time as well. And they were just like, we want it all like that. And I was like, okay, so I was like, okay, this is like ultimate freedom here. So I auditioned for the book, and I was the one artist that both the Archaea and the Henson Company agreed upon after I submitted my sample page. And after, like, I read the book, I started the screenplay, and I was obviously familiar with Jim's work. I was a big fan of the Muppets growing up, as well as his movie like Dark Crystal. But I'd never actually read any of his creative endeavors or watched any of his creative stuff before the Muppets. So luckily there was a lady, Karen Falk, who was the archivist for the Henson Company. And she basically sent me a ton of DVDs with all these short films by Jim Henson from his graduate days at college or university where he went, and experimental films and just things where he played with sound and color, had live action actors doing little shorts, and it was and you can see a lot of these now on YouTube. And it was just like astounding. And then I got to go meet, I went out to LA and I met the Henson family and got to sit with his daughter, Lisa, who was the head of the company at the time. And she kind of informed me about her dad as well, like talking about trips they would take and his obsession with like the desert and the night sky. So I really began to get this like picture of Jim, what he was playing with like as a creator, but also maybe where his headspace was at the time when he wrote Tale of Sand as a screenplay, because it was back in he started writing, I think it was the mid 60s, and the copy I worked from, I think it was the late 60s, 67, I think that might have been, or maybe 69 screenplay. And so I really just began to like live in this world of Jim Henson's creation. And I just took the screenplay and just began to like break it down into a graphic novel. Like tried to keep the big things he liked to play with were movement, sound, like music, and color. So obviously I couldn't do sound in a comic, so I used color to echo sound, and obviously movement is something quite natural you can do in comics, by the way of like, you know, characters, panel placements, all that kind of stuff. So and I just kind of just dove into this world. I didn't come up for 6 months basically, and I just broke it down, played with it. I plot like I just ended up. I think I ended up breaking it down to about 150 pages, and then the company asked me to cut it down to I think about 140 or 130. I can't remember the final page count. But it was fascinating. It was like a very intense journey. I think I did it over the course of like 4 to 6 months, and it was nonstop. And my editor, Stephen Christie, was great because he kind of kept the companies at bay and kind of let me do what I wanted to do creatively on that project. So I think for me, it was such a great opportunity because I didn't feel constrained by editorial interference. The editor was like, I'm protecting you. You go nuts and do what you want to do. And for better or for worse, he trusted me. And whereas I've never received that kind of freedom since in comics, aside from maybe 1 or 2 projects where the company will trust me implicitly. But and I think that's why that book got the awards it did, is because I had the complete freedom to do what I want to do naturally, and not constrained by a page count or having to fit things into where a writer has written them. And yeah, it was liberating to work on that book basically, and it kind of showed me what I could do in comics as to what I'd been doing before.
Absolutely. Like there is a very specific portion in it that really, it's a very small portion that really kind of astounded me. I believe it's Mac is trying to cross the street. His name is Mac, right? So yeah, Mac is trying to cross the street, and you signify the passage of time by having a snail move along with him.
Yeah,
which is,
I remember that.
like, where, like, how did you come up with that? Was that in the script? Was that in the original script? How did you never use words? You don't say, you don't say like, 3 hours later or whatever. It's just, we know he's walking slowly because there is a snail right beside him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that kind of stuff I think I put a lot of my own sense of humor into the book. So there are definitely things that Jim put in there, and then there's definitely things that however my brain works. And I think it's also, I'm not sure where that might have come from, like where my idea came from. It could have been a spur of the moment thing while I'm drawing. I grew up on a lot of silent comedy. Like I loved Buster Keaton, The Three Stooges when I was a kid. That, like, all that visual comedy stuff was a lot of what I grew up on. And I think I was just translating a bit of that sensibility into that quirky sense of humor that came from those kind of films and early comic strips from when I was a kid. So what my reasoning was, obviously I was probably trying to figure something out, and I was like, yeah, I'll do this and that'll make sense. It's just, I think you're in the moment, you're like, you're in a Zen state and you're just working on these things and you just go with the flow. Like I said, I didn't have to explain it to my editor, so I was just kind of going with it, handing in pages and having fun with it basically. And I think that's goes to show. But yeah, that like I said, that project was liberating with the freedom I could do, because of the sense of the world, anything made sense.
Yeah.
Right. Like I could do anything. When Jim has a lion coming out of a limo to attack Mac, or a shark in a swimming pool in the middle of the desert. It's like all these, he's already set the boundaries so far out that anything I do will make sense in the script that he created. Right. So I think that was probably where I was coming from. Like I was like, oh, he's already made it crazy. I'm just going to go roll with it and have fun.
It's great problem solving too. But
yeah,
what did you were you surprised at the reaction that the book got?
Oh, hells yeah. Like I was, like I basically put my head down for half a year, worked on this project that a few people actually told me I shouldn't have taken. They were like, because I had other opportunities, but it felt right. Like I said, I was a big fan of Henson. So I was honored to be a part of his legacy. And I recall my editor jokingly at the time, but probably with an underlying sense of seriousness. When I finally submitted the entire book, it was off the press. my editor kind of, I think we were talking on the phone, and he was like, so this is the most expensive book we've ever produced.
Really?
Yeah, for the company. And he was like, so if it doesn't do well, you're basically, this company is going to sink the company. so, so I was just like, oh wow, that's nerve wracking. So yeah, I remember when the first reviews started to roll in, and my editor was actually quite prolific in the sense that he didn't just put the book out there into the world. He actually sent copies to every reviewer. He sent copies to a lot of the head editors at Marvel, DC, all these companies. So everybody had a copy of it. Like, he went out of his way to make sure people knew about it. And because of that, buzz started to come in early on where people were talking how good the work was. And I was obviously flattered. Like, you pull your head up and you go, oh my God, so like, what did I do? Did I go too crazy? Like, are people going to get this? Or is it, like, you just don't know, right? Especially with a script that is so bizarre that, obviously it's a screenplay from, 40 to or so years prior, or 50 years prior. And, a creator who has long passed. So it's like all these, you're just putting it out there and, hoping for the best basically. But yeah, no, I was astounded. And when we got nominated for 5 Eisners the following year, I was just blown away. Like, I was just, I remember going to the awards ceremony, and like when they announced the best artist, I was clapping as if for somebody else because I didn't hear my name. I was just like, "Oh, that's good, whoever won." And then my editor was like, he's like, "Dude, that was you." I'm like, "Oh shit!" Like, I was just like so out of it. I was just so happy to be there. Yeah, and I was just dumbfounded that occurred. Like, because you work so hard to get places, and you just sometimes when it happens, it just becomes surreal that something like that can actually take off and impact the industry that much.
It was a breath of fresh air, because to see something like that so widely praised, because like I'm sure like in a lot of comics fandoms, the critics they like to praise things like Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, for sure.
You go indie, you go there's a bunch of indie autobio comics and stuff.
Yep.
So it always feels like it's something that's more concrete, has a very, very set point. So seeing like a 140-page dream sequence,
yeah,
that celebrates just the visual storytelling, was just like, I felt like something was changing in comics at that point. So
I mean, yeah, I remember coming off the stage after accepting my award, and there was I'm blanking on the gentleman's name right now. He was a journalist in comics at the time. I later looked him up. He was like, had a column in a website, and he nicely pulled me aside and he says, like, you give me faith again in comics. And I was like, what? I was like, okay. But it was, yeah, up to that point, there was a lot of, unless you were a Marvel or DC book or whatever it might be, you weren't really getting a lot of notoriety unless you're one of the, an Alan Moore book, or, I was like the no-name brand on the shelf. Like, no one knew who the hell I was. You know what I mean? And for something like that to actually make an impression on an awards committee was, amazing.
What do you feel about the production value that Archaea puts on their books, as opposed to? Because I could use it as a dig on Marvel and DC and their production value, but I think Archaea is the outlier in this case. So.
Yeah, I think, Archaea doesn't produce as much content as they did. They're now a sub-imprint of Boom, unfortunately. But when they were there, and like my editor, Steven, who now works more on the film side of things, he went out of his way to make sure every book, or at least the top, tier of books that they were putting out, had a visual impact that made them their own art objects, if you will, if that makes any sense. Like, and yeah, the production value was fantastic. And like, I remember when I worked on Tale of Sand, Stephen was like, what do you want this book to look like? And I was like, and for me, like I held up, I don't have one here on hand right now, but, or maybe I do. Hold on a second here. Oh no, yeah. Like I just basically held up my sketchbook at the time, which was a moleskin. And I was like, this is what I think it should look like, because this is Mac's journal of his journey. So the whole idea was originally like Mac was transcribing his original adventure, basically. And so we literally just measured my sketchbook, and he sourced the elastic and everything for the production of that book. We chose the paper together, and like he brought in a great designer to help put the book together as well. And I worked closely with the designer to make sure everything flowed from the opening sequence right into the story and everything. So it was just,
That was brilliant, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that was Eric Skillman. He's fantastic, and like he just did a beautiful job. And like that's care that you don't see in a lot of other companies. I mean, every so often Marvel or DC will put out a Chip Kid book or something like a little bit higher level, but for the most part it's the regular editor just grabbing things off of the, putting together the trade paperback. They don't have any real design skills. They're just slapping a logo on top of art with a couple of names in the corner, and they're calling it a day, right? A lot of the design stuff that will happen in things like Marvel or DC on the day-to-day will be actually the creative team working on the book getting involved. Like I've known many, myself included, I've known many artists or creators that have worked for Marvel asking to change the logo, or to can we do like a design element in the beginning of the book or whatever it might be, like what's his name on the current, or not the current, but the Hickman X-Men run, like all that design sense in that's probably that's completely Hickman probably bringing that to the table. That probably had nothing to do with Marvel organizing that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
that's the way I see, knowing from knowing his work and his other works and the sensibilities he brings to the table. I would bet my life on it that he was in charge of all of that. And they were going along with it because he's probably doing it for free or like a minor extra fee, right?
Yeah.
It's so yeah, the care Archaea put into their books was phenomenal, and truly appreciate it, because every book I worked on with them in over the years, like I did Jane years later, was beautifully put together. So
yeah, I was gonna say the other thing you're probably best known for is Jane, which is a modern day retelling of Jane Eyre.
That was probably more quieter under the table, but yeah, it was an interesting challenge.
With what was uniquely challenging about it, would you say?
I mean, obviously you're telling a story, based on a book from like whatever 200 years ago or whatever it might be. I can't remember the exact date of the original, the Bronte sisters book, but Jane Eyre was once again one of those stories. Like we actually began. I was connected with the author, Aline Brosh McKenna, who works predominantly in film and TV, shortly after Tale of Sand, because she wanted to try her hand at comics, graphic novels. Jane Eyre was one of her favorite things, and she wanted to adapt it into a kind of a modern day setting. And so we were connected, and we kind of started developing. It was her idea, but I would sit there on the meetings, kind of help her be a sounding board, as well as my editor, Stephen, as well, on the story. And it took years for us to get the story into a place where we felt it was solid. And but she basically once again wrote a screenplay, because she was like, I don't know how to draw. I don't know how to write for comics. And I was like, don't worry, don't write for comics, write for what you know, which is film. And I'll break it down into comics. That's my job, right? So, which is the way I prefer to work if given the freedom. So basically, she wrote a screenplay, and I just started breaking it down throughout the over the course of like a year, basically. And then near the end, I began to restructure things a little bit. I went back to talk to her with our editorial team, and we kind of restructured the story a little bit. So so it was an interesting challenge because once again, I'm taking something that she's envisioning for film, even though she's creating it for a comic, she's still writing it as a film and then kind of breaking it down and trying to make it relevant, trying to have people invest in the story, the characters, all that kind of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So
it's awesome.
yeah.
Of the Marvel and DC stuff that you've done, what would you say is your favorite thing that you've done?
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say the most fun I've had on a book was probably one of my earlier jobs, which was maybe not a lot of people did know I did for Marvel, which was John Carter Gods of Mars.
Yeah,
I did like a 4-issue miniseries right after I did Tale of Sand, and because it was like for lack of a better word, a project I didn't really care about. I once again I had full freedom to do. I don't mean care as in like the editor didn't care about the project. The editor totally backed the project. It was just like it was a lower budget book. It wasn't starring the X-Men or Spider-Man or something like that. So no one was really paying attention to what we were doing, basically. So we had the liberty to have fun with it and then put it out there, basically. And it was once again working Marvel style with the writer. So the writer was Sam Humphries on that book. And because I had read the original books, I knew the story. And so Sam just broke it down into issues and what he wanted to see, what he wanted to change. And then I kind of drew it, and then he dialogued it after I drew the book, basically. Marvel, old Stanley, Jack Kirby's kind of methodology, basically.
Yeah.
So that was a lot. Yeah, Marvel style. Yeah. So that was a lot of fun. But out of the other stuff I've done, like I mean, there was some fun stuff. I think one of the more interesting, fun ones was probably Spider-Man Learning to Crawl with Dan Slott. Because with that project, it was an interesting premise. It changed a little bit, I think, from when I first got put onto the book till when we actually executed. But the editorial team changed a little bit, so they were forcing our hand to do different things a little bit. But that was fun because I got to reference the original run of obviously Spider-Man. I'm mimicking, or at least paying homage to Ditko and his early works. So that was a lot of fun, and probably one of the last projects I did fully traditionally as well, if I recall. That was because I got to take original panels from the Ditko run, and then maybe I'd expand the panel out and create other stuff happening. So it was a real joy to do that book, and just keep it in a simpler vibe with the classic comics of that era, but bring it into a modern day audience. So I think that was the highlight. But there was something fun about all the projects I worked on. It's just depending on what it was. Hawkeye was playing with different mediums, doing different things, story like art wise. Nova, I got to co-write, which was a nice exercise for me, working in the Marvel world and actually getting involved with writing characters for them. So yeah, they're awesome. But I'd say probably those top two were my favorites.
Dan is obviously a huge fan of the Stanley and Steve Ditko Spider-Man, and he has made it up. He has kind of said many times that that's pretty much the canon, and anything anyone else builds is from Stanley and Steve Ditko Spider-Man. My question to you though is how easy or difficult is it to mimic Steve Ditko's art style? Because in my mind, the way I look at it, I'm like, I would imagine it's not easy because he's got a lot of quirks to his own.
Yeah.
To his
style. Yeah. No, I mean, obviously I was paying homage, so I was by no means, I was trying to I was trying to use his language, but obviously I'm not him, and I'm not going to be able to do him any justice to the point where people go like, oh, that's a great mimicry of. I was just trying to kind of tip my hat to him. But the thing I liked about what Ditko did, which I think no one after him did with Spider-Man for quite a while. I think it's a few artists have come back and integrated it a little bit, but he really drew Spider-Man in the early issues very awkward. He was very like his positioning on when he was on walls or crawling around was not quite human, almost like it was like the limbs were a little bit disjointed and the body positioning was just a little bit weird. So like it was almost that there's a spider sensibility in this kid. And he also drew him very lanky and wiry, as opposed to later on when people began to draw him more a little bit bulked up in later issues. So yeah, it was I think I tried to capture as much of it as I could without trying to be a photocopy of it. So I went out of my way to use a quill to ink it, just to get that same kind of scratchy line that he had.
Yeah.
And obviously studied a lot of the earlier issues to try to figure out the body language he gave Peter Parker and Spider-Man, and also the way he laid things out, the way he, because if you look at a lot of the earlier stuff, there was no crazy visual sequences of, Spider-Man, these graphic designed impactful pages that you would later see when, Todd McFarlane came on the series decades later. So it was fun. It was fun trying to capture his language. How well I did, I'm not sure, but
you got it though. So,
yeah.
yeah, I would say like it's something that I get kind of fascinated by, because it's like Charles Schultz and Bill Watterson, for example. I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're both like maybe the two, best comics artists to ever do it, but I mean, in comic strip artists to ever do it. But I do feel like it is easier to mimic Bill Watterson's style, because Charles Schultz you can kind of see there's a tremor in his hand.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you would copy that.
Yeah, you have to purposely like shake your hand a little bit. Yeah.
And you can tell when you're doing it on purpose, right?
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah, there's certain things that you can never mimic because they're not the tool. They're the actual way the artist moves their hand, or the gestures they make, or just their intuitive body language, right? Like you said, like a hand tremor or whatever it might be, right? So, yeah, it was fun to do, and it's always fun to kind of like play with the greats, basically.
You've done multiple things, for multiple companies, but would you say you're still primarily known as an indie artist?
It's weird. I think I've always straddled the line between the two worlds. I don't belong in either, if that makes any sense. Like I've worked in the mainstream enough where I have enough cred that I worked for Marvel, DC, and all these other companies. But I've also worked on all these other things that only exist in the indie realm. But I'm not quite indie and I'm not quite mainstream. So I feel like I'm in both, but not fully in. So it's like a weird position to be in, if that makes any sense. Like I love playing. I love the independence of the indie scene and trying different things and the stories you can tell there. And I think when I was first entering the industry, the divide was much greater between the two.
Yeah. Like
you were either one or the other. So when I was straddling both, people were like, where do you belong? I don't know where to put you. Like, because I do one project for Marvel, and then I would do another for like Archaea, and people were like, why are you doing a romance graphic novel? Like what's going on here? Are you a superhero guy? I'm like, nah, I'm a story guy. I like telling stories.
You just like stuff.
Yeah, and I like the challenge and the adventure of going down these different avenues. So nowadays, I think you have a lot more freedom to cross over with companies like Image, who have kind of straddled that median ground between the mainstream and the pure indie. So you have like, a company like maybe Drawn and Quarterly or something like that, which is, I would put in the pure indie realm. But then you have that nice gamut in between, that you have books that maybe appear at Image that could also fit in the indie realm, but those same books, like for example, Invincible could have been a Marvel book, like a Marvel Max book, for example. It's just under the Image label, right? So you have that nice widespread thing now that you didn't have before. But Yeah, so I'm not sure where I fit, to be honest with you. I
Doesn't
just play in
matter.
everybody's sandboxes in my own, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
No.
It's true what you said. Because I remember maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, every time I bought an indie comic, there would always be something like, oh, this is so much better than Marvel and DC comics. And I'm like, stop it. Stop.
Yeah, it's a different story. It's a different medium. I'm not sure a different medium. This medium is the same. It's just a different kind of story. But people were labeling it. Well, this one talks about, love life or normal things. So that's an indie comic. It has no color. It's an indie comic. But yeah, it's just silly. That weird divide. And I think it's like I said. I think it's a little bit. There's more crossover now. I mean, there's still a divide, but there's a lot more crossover with creators. I think.
Comics are so small, guys. There's no need to fight.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's a tiny, tiny industry.
How is you're wrapping up Stillwater with Chip Zdarsky? And
Yes, yeah. So
how's that been going?
it's going well. So Stillwater's a comic series I do with Chip for Skybound, and issue 13, I believe, just came out this month. Excuse me. And that's basically us returning for the final arc of this kind of horror thriller series that Chip concocted and put together based on his, I guess, kind of his experiences living in a small town, growing up in a small town, and pushing it to the limit story-wise. And it's pretty fascinating because it's once again, it's a very different kind of story. It's not superhero driven. It's very much character driven. It's a small town where people are basically immortal, and how that affects that town and the people within it, and the horrors that kind of ensue when immortality is a thing, right? Yeah. And how people react to it and deal with it. So yeah, we're on the final arc, and I mean, when I say final arc, we still have about a year to go, I think, in this final arc. But Chip always had a finite story to tell with Stillwater. It was never meant to be a limitless, ongoing thing like The Walking Dead or something like that. It was always meant to be a finite tale. And yeah, it's going to be a nice, fun, dark journey to the end in the coming year.
Can I just say that massively surprises me, because I'm used to comics like ending at numbers like 12 or 45,
yeah,
or 75, but like 18, like
yeah, I think we're not. Is that what they said? 18?
Well, it's just I'm just going with you've had 2 arcs for 12 issues, so I'm
yeah. I think I believe it's 20. I could be wrong on that.
Or right, 20. Like I feel like that's in the middle of what I would expect.
I'm just the artist. I don't decide these things.
It's interesting that to have a story of that length. Oh, 3 arcs.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chip had it basically plotted out in the arc he wanted to tell, basically. And once, I think it was meant to be a little bit longer originally, but once I started drawing it, he realized he wanted to up the pace of the story a little bit more. So he kind of truncated the story just a little bit more for pacing, not for what he wanted to tell, basically. So yeah, it is a weird number, but I'm not sure how these things get decided.
That is interesting, because like if there, your work does have a sense of pace to it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's interesting, because I think after I did the first 4 issues of the comic, because basically when I came out to the project, Chip had already written the first 3 to 5 issues, if I recall.
Okay.
So basically, I was at that point just coming in, and I began drawing. But he said once he actually saw the issues drawn, he realized he wanted to kind of up the pacing a little bit more of the story. So he began to kind of compress things a little bit. And that's where I think shortened the run by what might have been 24, got truncated down to whatever we're ending at, 2021, 22. I'm not sure exactly. I don't have the final scripts in my hand yet.
Because even something like Tale of Sand, I feel like it's 140 pages, but I feel like if we gave that same story to 10 artists, most of them would maybe do it in maybe 200.
Maybe I don't know. Like I was given a rough when I tackled that, I was given a rough limit, and I think, like I said, I originally paced it out to about 160. Um, but the company wanted to keep it smaller because obviously they had a certain budget with the book, so they wanted me to shorten it to I believe it was 148. I think it was around there somewhere.
Yeah.
And just to meet the printing signatures. Because actually we did a companion book. Well, actually, they're both right there actually. And in the companion book, we actually ended up including the sequences I had cut from the original. So that was kind of a fun like DVD extra that we ended up including in those. But yeah,
Deleted scenes.
yeah, and I mean, speaking of like, but speaking to Jane, the other book I did, like that was a book where yeah, it's 250 pages because I was basically told to lay it out, and I just took my time pacing it how I thought it should be. No one gave me a page limit on that one, right? So
you were adapting a very thick novel that is, to be honest, kind of slow. So
yeah, and I want to, but I wanted the pacing to be natural. Like I find that I love the pacing in European and Bede and Japanese manga because I find their pacing is much more drawn out.
Yeah.
Whereas the pacing in North American comics is far more compressed from issue to issue, and so that's something I really wanted to play with. Which, you know, if given the opportunity, I probably would have taken Tale of Sand and made it 200 pages, but unfortunately that wasn't there. So I then did that with Jane, which allowed me to kind of say like pull it, have moments, have things where letting the story breathe where it wants to breathe, and then accelerating it when it needs to be accelerated. Yeah, but I don't know where that tangent came from.
I asked, so
yeah. Oh yeah, the weird arc of Stillwater, basically.
You have a Kickstarter out right now.
Yes,
for Kukuburi. Would you like to tell people about? Maybe give the elevator pitch for it.
For sure. I mean, Kukuburi is basically the story of Nadia, a girl who kind of, I guess it's what I say. It's a mashup of Alice in Wonderland meets Little Nemo in Slumberland with a touch of Miyazaki's Spirited Away. Basically, it's like a girl. She accidentally stumbles into this world where it's kind of like this ridiculous dreamscape, and slowly we begin to learn that the world is feeding off her subconscious, creating imaginings, creating nightmares, and we're slowly kind of learning her role in the world as she encounters this would-be, I guess, king, for lack of a better word, who is trying to take control of the world and kind of destroy it and her in the process, kind of thing. So it's very much a world I just created where I could play and have the freedom to do whatever I want. Kind of in a sense like Tale of Sand, where anything goes. I can make it work because it's a weird realm. It's a dreamscape of silly characters. But, you know, for all its storybook qualities, it actually has a very dark underlying tone to it. So it's kind of, I've compared it a little bit to, what's that Disney movie, The Black Cauldron?
Yeah.
Where it's a very Disney movie. It's cartoony, it's beautiful, but there is kind of like a dark edge underneath where a lot more, I guess, serious things are happening and being explored. But yeah, the Kickstarter is in its last week right now. We have seven days left to go, and basically this is what I like to call jumping off point into returning to my indie roots. Like Kukuburi is something I created a decade ago and used to update regularly, but when my career took off in comics, it got kind of shelved. And it was a story I always wanted to finish. It's been plotted out to the end in my little script book, and it just felt like the right time to go back to it. I've kind of been a decade in mainstream comics now. I've had a lot of fun. I've worked on a lot of people's characters and different things, and I'm really excited and just yearning to get back to my own stuff, like to get back to my own sensibilities, my own type of storytelling, and Kukuburi is one of those things that is very drawn out, very letting the moments breathe, and just have the art kind of sing on the page as well. So what's on the Kickstarter now is the first volume of what will be about 6 volumes of about 160 pages each, basically. And I hope my plans to do one a year in the ensuing years. So
this might be a personal question. I'll take it out if you don't want me to put it up. But
sure.
What makes it possible for you to do this now on a financial level? Because obviously, when you work for something like Marvel, DC, or Image, there is a steady paycheck with each gig. But when you're doing your own stuff, when you're self-publishing, you do have to, it is a financial risk. So is it something like Kickstarter, or did you just end up saving enough from the last 10 years? Or
I mean, it's a little bit of both. I feel, or I hope, my name has enough recognition where I can get a little bit of enough attention and support to do a project like this. It is utilizing Kickstarter as a crowdfunding tool where, the money I make on this project is going into not only printing the project, but partially sustaining me into the new year. So I have the money that I'm making off my regular series, which, like you said, I'm saving, putting aside bits and pieces of, to then hopefully sustain me in the year to come. And, it is a risk. It is, there is a danger to it. It's not going to be easy. I've done the indie thing before. I feel like there are more opportunities to connect with your audience directly now and make it more financially sustainable with things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and all that kind of stuff. The pandemic also showed me like what became more important or more relevant to what I wanted to do, but also told me, you only need so much to live off of if you're not doing extravagant things like going out to fancy dinners every 2 weeks and flying to cons every other month and different things like that. So I know what my realistic budget is for a year, and if I can even make that via the Kickstarter, and I'm not going to stop working in the industry outright. I will work in covers, editorial pieces, small gigs along the way, but I think this will be me definitely stepping away from any sort of monthly book for a while anyways, because that's the hardest part. Like working on a monthly book, you don't have time to do anything else, or it's very difficult to do time on anything else. And the one thing I've always enjoyed in my career is doing short runs on things like 4 or 5 issues, and then stepping away and doing a lot of other things, and then coming back and doing another 4-issue run or a 5-issue run. It's never been my goal to be on a comic series for years and years. Like I mean, even these days, it's rare that you'll see an artist on a run of more than 12 issues. So I prefer doing graphic novels. I prefer doing things that I can invest in over time. So this is me taking that leap of faith, and hopefully it works out. Like, I'd rather try and, fail than not have tried it all. So, knock on wood, as they say, and we'll hope things go for the best.
Well, considering you were funded in 2.5 hours.
Well, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that covers the printing of the book, which was the main goal, obviously, and took me by surprise. Like, I was not expecting that quick of a funding. So yeah, I told that support blew me away, because Kukuburi is, like I said, it was something I started a long time ago. So there was a large fan base who was patient and has stuck around to say, hey, we're still interested. Let's finish the story. And the other thing is, I hope by doing it on a platform like Kickstarter, which is in itself a kind of its own community, it finds some new readers, basically, and new people who discover it for the first time, and then getting it up to stores and different things like that. So it's hopefully something that will grow with every volume that happens and puts out. So that's the plan for the next 5 years, and hopefully every campaign gets better and stronger, and we do it up, basically.
You have mentioned an influence on this book, which is Little Nemo in Slumberland. We have been talking about comic strip artists
Yeah,
for this interview.
yeah.
Where is Windsor Mckay in the pantheon of greats?
Oh, I mean, he's like one of the first. He's like the one of the creators of the medium. Basically, his stuff is amazing. Like, when I was younger, I probably didn't get it, but I discovered him probably like in my college years, and then like you had those wonderful Little Nemo big books. They were like the massive reprints, and I have two of them, and they're just like gorgeous to flip through, and like it's amazing how a comic strip that was created, like what was that, the late 1800s, I think. I'm
Yeah,
blanking on when it was.
yeah.
It's still inspiring today. Like it's just amazing to look at what he did with that comic strip. And like if you were to put that out today in a comic book, it would hold its own against anything out there, you know.
Yeah,
And that's the beautiful thing about it. And yeah, no, he's definitely an inspiration and one of the founders of the medium, basically,
I
for
would say
sure.
only two things date that strip. One
Mhm.
is obviously the racial depictions,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the other thing is his lettering,
Oh yeah, I guess.
which is like, how are you so great at everything else?
Well, it's good to have flaws, At least you tried.
Like the lettering runs out of space, and then he just goes.
He just goes around and around. That's so true. You can just tell he's just going with it. He's like, whatever. I'll just put it over here. So true.
Also, when you were talking about Alice in Wonderland and Little Nemo in Slumberland, now all of a sudden I'm thinking if Windsor Mckay based that idea off of Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, I wonder. It's true. I'm not sure which one came first, to be honest with you. I'm not. I can't remember when the Alice in Wonderland was published. But I mean, they definitely speak to the similar things. One goes down a rabbit hole into a different world, another one via sleep enters a
Yeah.
dreamscape, right? So like they definitely pay homage to the same kind of escapism um, in their stories, basically. Yeah,
So
yeah.
you've said Alice in Wonderland, Little Nemo in Slumberland, Black Cauldron, and
Mhm.
Spirited Away.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good enough peg for anyone who doesn't know what Kukuburi
Yeah,
is about
yeah,
to know what you're kind of getting into.
yeah. That's the vibe. It's colorful. Like I remember one of the greatest comments I ever received on the comic when I was posting it online was like, this comic is so colorful. I want to lick my screen. So I was just like, and I was like, oh, that's nice. And I had a lot of great readers for a long time. Parents tell me they were reading it with their kids. Other people they were telling me they were re-inspired to draw again. So I knew it had its moment, and now I'm just trying to bring it back and give it a bigger life than it had, and give it the life it deserved. I think is the end of the day.
You're about 3 times over your target at this point.
Mhm.
Do you still have any stretch goals for the book?
Yeah, we have a few. We're about to debut a couple this week, which will be some. I was waiting on some quotes from the printer, which were coming a bit slow because I have some ideas for something we'll be dropping this week, which I'm not sure when your podcast is coming out, but basically, I think we'll be doing
I
an
could put
original.
it. I could put this up exactly after you announce it if you want.
Well, I think it'll be announced today, actually,
Okay.
or Friday. I'm not sure exactly, but basically, I believe we'll be doing an original painted cover edition to the book, where basically people can commission. The book will be printed with a watercolor paper hardcover, and then I'll go in and paint an original cover for that edition. So whoever backs that edition will have their very own custom Kukuburi cover for their book. So that'll be like the ultimate crazy edition. I've been talking back and forth with the print to see if we can make it happen, and I think we can. So that'll be the next, the final big drop, I guess. Aside from a few things we're doing, I guess that's not a stretch. That's a tier. But we're also dropping in some stuff like stickers into the campaign. And we will be doing some final stretch goals for things like enamel pins, which are quite popular with people, and some other book enhancements like, spot gloss, different treatments, and things like that. So I'm trying to get as many fun things into people's hands as I can, basically, and then going from there. So right now, I'm super happy. People right now, if they come in and buy either the soft cover or the hardcover, they'll also get a poster. What else do we have there happening? Man, my brain's a little bit tired. The early backers already have a bookmark, a print, and I think our next stretch goal is a chase card and a magnet set going to an early backer. So there's a lot of stuff there already. And if I can add one or two more things with the stretch goal that everybody gets, then I definitely will be happy to, So I think our last stretch goal will be a nice enamel pin featuring one of the characters from the book. I'm thinking probably Rendo, the octopus, or the quadrupus, sorry. He'll make a nice little enamel pin that people can wear.
Yeah, you've got static clings.
Yeah, that was the one. Static cling, the first one. I blanked there. Yeah, so everybody gets one of those too. That's a nice 4x5. You can slap it on your computer, a window, car, whatever it is, kind of thing. So yeah, there's a lot of fun stuff.
I do have to say, every Kickstarter that I've ever seen has had a stretch goal of enamel pins, and
people love them.
I can't really say I get it, but
they're a thing. I have a few from campaigns I've backed, but I don't really have a backpack. Like if I was in college or university, I probably would have slapped them all on my backpack or something, right? Yeah. Or on my denim coat or something. But I just, people love. I'm happy to make them because they look gorgeous. We have some from previous campaigns we've done for these great ones from the Forest Folk campaign that we did, and they look beautiful. But it's something more for the all ages audience, the kids, the different things, and people love them. I'm happy to do them as long as people are excited by it. I'm happy to be a part of it. For me, the most important thing is the book and the story,
of course.
But any embellishment that helps make that happen and helps reach a different audience and maybe adds value to what they see as their support is important. So but I just want to make sure I don't want to do silly things like I'm going to do a Kukuburi mouse pad. I'm like, if it works for the property, I'm happy to do it. So with our last campaign, Forest Folk, for the Raid Press, we did because there was a band rock star theme to it. We did temporary tattoos. We did band concert shirts. So we had fun with it, but we tried to make it echo the product that we were, the comic that we were showcasing, right? So
because
that's what we're trying to do the same thing with Kukuburi, make it fit as well as we can to the book and the story and the characters that we have there. So at least with Kukuburi, the characters are fun and bubbly, so I think they'll work great as pins. Personally, I'd love to see little vinyl figures one day, like those Jay and Silent Bob in action figures from the 90s or whatever it might be. That would be my favorite.
The one where they just do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly what they do.
Kevin Smith was like, if I were being honest, I'd call this a doll, but then you wouldn't buy it.
Yeah. No, I love that, the in action figure. So yeah, definitely that would be something I would love to do. Because I have those figures. I also had the I don't know if you remember this. There was a series called Scary Girl, which were all these cute little monsters and different characters. So definitely something fun to have. If we ever get to it, I'd love to do it.
That'd be awesome. Awesome. You did mention RAID, the Royal Academy of Illustration and Design. Would you like to talk about your involvement with that? And
for sure,
the public should know about it.
Yeah. So basically, the Royal Academy of Illustration Design, or as RAID, as we have here, was formed back in 2002 by Chip Zdarsky, Ben Shannon, Kagan McLeod, and Cameron Stewart. It was basically just for artists, creators that wanted to kind of work outside of the house in a shared studio. So it's just basically a little shared office space. And I joined in 2006 after one of the original members left. And after that, the community began to grow. It began to, what started with 4 became 6, 8. We moved to a slightly larger building. It became 10, 16. And then in the past, back at just the year before the pandemic in 2018 or 2019, we moved into where we are now, which is a large, like 5,000 square foot studio space. We have like 20 different artists and creatives here who work in comics, who work in film, publishing, animation, like all kinds of different things. It's such an inspiring space to be. And we also have writers as well. And the front end, we're actually street level with this studio, which we weren't in our others. But this one, we have a cafe and art gallery in the front end of the building. And yeah, it's just an amazing creative space. And in the past 2 years or 3 years, I guess, we began to move into publishing, basically. We had done, beginning in 2017, an anthology series called just basically Raid. And grab here, actually. So we just, we would do these yearly anthologies that basically showcased, talent from the studio and a lot of our networks. A lot of great artists like, Joe Vreens and Marcus Toe and like Tri Wong, like independent indie artists, also established different creators. And it was a lot of fun to do these. And, we had we funded these ourselves, but over the pandemic, we began using Kickstarter to then create, collections of forest folk, of Kukuburi, which we're doing now, and different things. So it was something that was a natural evolution for my love of the indie scene, and basically kind of creating an opportunity to publish these stories and creations of individuals who might have a harder time getting them put out by a regular publisher. Like I remember years ago taking my webcomic to Image, and it was a humor comic called Butternut Squash, and at the time I was like trying to get it published in a monthly book. And I remember the editor at the time, I won't mention names, but the editor at the time, or the publisher, was like, he's like, "You're not funny." Like, he's like,
"Oh, ouch."
He was like, "You're not funny. We don't want this." And I was like, "We have 140,000 readers a month on this comic, or sorry, a week on this comic." And we had international fan bases in like Germany, Australia, Poland, France, the Ukraine, UK. Like it was just like we had great readership. But because the guy, just his own personal taste in humor wasn't what ours was, he was quickly shot down. And we later released under another publisher, and we got rave reviews. But that's the kind of thing that I find there's a lot of gatekeepers in the community of comics. And so if we can offer like an opportunity for independent creators to kind of get their stories out, or even established creators just to do something different, you know what I mean, without having to answer to like, what demographic is this, what is this, or where does it fit? We're like, no, we just want to do good stories, have fun, and get them out there. And that's what we're trying our hand at. Basically, we're not trying to be a Marvel or a DC or a Drawn and Quarterly for that matter. We're like that indie in between scenario where we're going to put books out, predominantly graphic novels. We're not interested in doing floppies or anything like that. And yeah, get them out to comic shops and mail order, whatever it might be, and try to make it a sustainable, viable thing for indie creators, basically.
It's like the spirit of a zine without being a zine.
Kind of, yeah. It's like it's that weird like realm where a little bit like a zine, a little bit like, I think there's a proliferation of a lot of these kind of endeavors in like the 80s and 90s, where you had things like Malibu, you had Vortex, you had Tundra Press,
Mad Love,
Fantagraphics, and some of them have survived, some haven't over the years. But there was a lot of niche publishers for a while, which really curated unique and different and interesting things, which you don't see as much of anymore. Like I feel like Image could probably do it, but they still work off of the comic model, not, hey, let's do a really cool, interesting graphic novel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they still exist. Like Top Shelf is a great one as well. First Second.
Yeah.
But a lot of these places also have, they're part of larger publishing empires, so they have to answer to a little bit more people, and they're gatekeepers. They have a certain look or vibe to what they want to do. So we have that. We're like the island of misfit children doing our own thing here in the corner, basically.
I always find that fascinating because you have things like the editor who told you that you weren't funny, and then not realizing that you have such a wide following. Because I'm like, a lot of people will dismiss something like webtoons, but then you go on webtoons and like those people have like 500,000 viewers.
Oh yeah,
like
no, it's crazy.
per issue.
Yep,
it's crazy, and I don't know. I know it's free, so.
Well, it is, but the company Webtoons will monetize certain ones, and to turn them into. I think like one or two is actually being turned into an anime.
Netflix,
I think, yeah, Netflix, yeah. So it's all there to make it happen, and I think, for comics is a weird, because people are always saying that comics is dying. I don't think comics are going to die, but comics have to evolve. To and I don't necessarily mean evolve by making them, because there was a trend in the 90s or early 2000s that was like, let's make everything a motion comic. Like that's that's just a bad cartoon from 1975 or 1960. Like, what are you doing? Like, but I think
it's like those Marvel cartoons from the
60s. Like, it's just like, like I was like, why is this, like, this seems like a silly thing to do. But what I mean by evolve is like, just like vinyls, you still have vinyl albums today. You still have these boutique items, and I think comics, especially, I think now that there's a wider market that's accepting of comics as a medium of storytelling and not just a children's thing, it's about creating those books that can live as art pieces on their own, like a Tale of Sand, or like, one of my favorites is Asterios Polyp from Mazzucchelli. That book just lives in that form, the way it's put together, the way it's bound, the paper choice, like everything. That book is an experience that can only live in comics.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of stuff today, unfortunately, is done as a pitch for TV series or movies.
I feel that too.
So the art form isn't excelling how it used to. There are beautiful artists. I look up to so many artists in the industry, but I think the art form itself is losing some of its magic, in the sense of like what you can do with the art form. But every so often, you'll get some really unique comics that come out and you're like, okay, it's still there. It's just kind of like it comes out in spurts and peaks when people take advantage of the medium, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of
go ahead.
Let's go. No, I was gonna say, it's a lot of the monthly stuff you see. It's much more writer driven, splash pages, talking heads for issues and that sort of thing. And it's not really playing a lot. Like, certain artists like Frank Quietly is a great example. An artist who creates things that can only live in comics, the way he does them, the way he puts them together, the way you, like his, was it We Three?
Yeah.
Where he used the medium like no other artist ever to that, I mean? Like, you could, things happen in that
panels.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, like all that stuff it lives in comics. And I would love to see more of that on a day-to-day basis. Really, people taking that medium and turning it into, using the opportunity that's there, basically, to tell the story.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I agree with you. Like, I think in terms of art, in terms of draftsmanship, the artists today, I don't think there's ever been anything like the sheer variety of artists today.
Oh my God, no, it's amazing, astounding.
It's amazing. But in terms of actually putting it together as a comic, I do feel like, there are some who are great at it, but then a lot of them really do feel like it does feel like it is a picture Hollywood.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff where, you know, like I said, you could be. I've always said you could be a great artist, but not necessarily a great storyteller. You know what I mean? And there is some beautiful panel work. There's beautiful draftsmanship, like a beautiful, like I said, like to no end. And but some of them just there's no nuance. It's just like there's no pace. The fluidity of panels, the pacing of stories, or just the unique draftsmanship of someone like I said, Frank Quietly or something like that, or Gibbons or anybody. Like it's kind of becoming less and less present in the industry, and especially when you go to things like webtoons, where you're scrolling just panel, blank space, word balloon, panel.
Yeah.
You're losing that artistry of making pages kind of like move throughout and sing, and there is, because you're basically just drawing a panel that has no other like reliance on the panel before in any artistic sense. Basically, you're just kind of doing still images or pinups along the way. So yeah, it's it's unfortunate, but like I said, every so often you get someone that comes out and utilizes comics for what I think they can be like excel at. So.
Yeah, the cream still rises to the top.
Exactly. Yeah. It's they're like I said, I'm not begrudging. There are like great stories, great artists. It's just I wish I saw more unique, like going back to Windsor Mckay, basically early on, like that one Sunday page that he did, like every page was so unique and different, and how each panel played off each panel and how the story flowed through that page.
Yeah.
Was amazing, and like I said, still stands up today. So if that guy is out doing what's happening today story wise, then we're in trouble.
How much of that do you think, though, is the fact that even in the Sunday strips, nobody has that much space anymore?
Oh no, I know. Like I remember watching that documentary I mentioned earlier, Stripped, and how every bit of space is just being downgraded and downgraded and downgraded. And yeah, I mean, obviously you can no longer do that with newspaper strips. I'm not even sure, do like even newspapers, because I know a lot of them gone online. Do they offer comics online? It's been so long, I don't even know. But at least with the comic page, you're still able to do that. You're still able to play in that realm. I just think, unfortunately, a lot of comics now are writer driven, and a lot of the writers might not have as much of a visual sense of storytelling, so they're just pacing out what they wanted to see on the page. But it's mostly word balloons jammed in with word balloons, and the artistry almost has become secondary to the writer. Where I think if you want to get the best comic, it's a mutual relationship between that artist and writer, or it's a writer and artist who does it all himself, like someone like Jeff Smith with Bone, or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's an interesting time, because I think the opportunity right now is endless.
I do have to worry about. I have to wonder about that, though, because like I don't particularly understand why it's considered a writer's medium, considering that just the way that comics work, like no matter what the writer writes, the artist has to execute that on the page.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why. Because, like, for example, I like to point this out a lot. Like, people like to say Matt Fraction's Hawkeye run.
Mm-hmm.
But every time anyone talks about Matt Fraction's Hawkeye run, the first thing anyone ever talks about is David Aja.
Exactly.
Like,
yeah.
Why is that? I don't get it. So
yeah, and I mean, and that's an artist who really made each page, like he played with the medium. He created a visual language for Hawkeye that made it like without him as the artist on that book, it wouldn't be that. Like that's what made that run. Basically, it was his sensibilities as an artist, but that's also an artist and a writer working together to create something. Like I've spoken with Aja about this, and he was like, yeah, I want to do a story with a dog and the pizza. Like, so that's what you had, that whole issue devoted to the dog. And this is two people collaborating. But unfortunately, a lot of the time in comics, it's usually you just get the script and you just draw whatever is in the script. That collaboration is missing, you know. But it does happen from time to time. And, you know, going back to, you asked me earlier what my favorites were, like when I worked on the Gods of Mars miniseries for Marvel, like that was very much like the writer going, here's a synopsis of what I want to happen in this issue. I drew it. He came back and dialogued it based on my execution. And that's probably an extreme version, because like I was working from a paragraph and making a 22-page comic. But that's one end of the spectrum. But there is like a nice middle ground where you can work on something and actually get a better flow, a better sense of the story, where the art and the words are balanced rather than imbalanced, if you will.
Would you say you prefer Marvel method to full script?
Oh yeah, hands down for me. Yeah. I know a lot of artists who don't. A lot of artists prefer the full script method. I'm a big fan of the Marvel method. Yeah, 100%. I've worked with some artists who have, writers who have done a bit of a in-between version where they might present the dialogue, but not break anything down, you know. So I've done that as well. But a lot of my favorite jobs have been working on just Marvel style scripts. But not to say like I did a comic last, I guess 2 years ago now, with Kurt Busiek. It was a special issue of what was it, Captain America? No. Yeah, Captain America, yeah. And it was like a full script, like thick. And but it was so well broken down, so well written, that it was just a joy to work on, because he didn't overwhelm it with dialogue. It was like a nice balance. You know what I mean?
And I'm sure, knowing Kurt, that if you had made any changes to it, he would have respected it.
Oh yeah, that's, I mean, I'd be lucky. A lot of the great writers I've worked with, from like Jason Aaron to, you know, Chip Zdarsky and Jeff Lemire, like if I ever suggested anything, they would take it in stride. They would be like, oh, that's a good idea. You know, like you know, if I wanted to cut a panel, merge a panel, you know, even like a couple of scripts over the years, I've asked to cut complete pages that I thought were unnecessary, and you know, the writers have, you know, agreed. So it does happen. It's tough though when you're on a monthly book and the writer's working 3 months or 4 months ahead of you while you're drawing the script. You know what I mean? So it's hard to have that kind of connection when you're just kind of racing the clock every month on deadlines. So, but yeah, when the opportunity is there, it's great. You know what I mean? So, you know, I hope it happens more often than not.
Well, Mr. Ramón Pérez, thank you for joining the show. We got really technical in the last 20 minutes.
My pleasure, man. It was great to chat.
And I want to wish you good luck on Kukuburi. And thank you so much for coming on. And come on back anytime.
Oh, a pleasure. I'd love to come on anytime to chat further. I love comics.
Thank you.
No problem, man.